Most people die never knowing this. They lose, they fail, they blame luck. Machiavelli called them sheep waiting for slaughter, convinced the universe distributes fairness like some cosmic charity. But the men who carved empires from chaos understood three invisible forces that govern every negotiation, every power move. Every moment someone kneels or conquers. Virtu, Fortuna, Necessita. The triad that separates princes from peasants, masters from servants, those who take what they want from those who beg for permission. This isn't philosophy. This is the architecture of domination hidden in plain sight for 5 centuries. And by the end of this video, you'll see every interaction differently. Every handshake, every smile, every promise. Because once the mechanism is revealed, you cannot unsee how the world actually operates beneath the performance of civility. But here's what makes this dangerous. 2 of these forces are invisible to most people. They move through rooms, they destroy careers, they decide who rises. The third force, that's the one they fear you'll discover. Let's start with what Machiavelli observed that most refuse to accept. Power isn't distributed fairly. It isn't earned through goodness. It flows to those who understand the 3 forces, who can read the invisible currents that move through every human interaction, like a predator reads wind direction before the kill. Most people believe success is random. Luck, timing, genetics. They externalize everything because accepting the alternative, that there's a learnable system, that some people know things they don't, shatters the comfortable delusion that hard work and virtue guarantee results. Machiavelli wrote The Prince in 1513, exiled, watching lesser men rule the cities he once commanded. And in that bitterness, he encoded something most political theorists still won't touch. The exact formula that determines who wins and who gets crushed beneath the wheel of history. The Triad, 3 forces working in concert. Miss one, you're vulnerable. Ignore one, you're prey. Virtu, the force of will, skill, ruthless capability, not virtue in the moral sense. Machiavelli despised that translation, but the ability to impose your will on reality regardless of the obstacles. Fortuna, the force of chaos, randomness, the river that drowns the unprepared, lifts the strategic, and mocks those who pray for fairness. Necessita, the force of pressure, crisis, the invisible hand that removes all choices except the brutal ones. The mechanism Machiavelli used to explain why good men commit atrocities and weak men discover strength they never knew existed. Here's what happens when you don't understand these forces. You rely on fairness. You expect reciprocity. You believe showing up and working hard creates results. Then someone who understands the triad walks into your industry, your relationship, your negotiation. They don't play fair. They bend Fortuna to their advantage while you blame bad luck. They weaponize Necessita while you freeze in confusion. They deploy Virtu while you hesitate, bound by rules they've already abandoned. Machiavelli watched this pattern repeat across kingdoms, marriages, businesses, wars. The same 3 forces, the same outcome. The question isn't whether these forces exist. They operate whether you acknowledge them or not. The question is, do you want to be the one who sees the mechanism or the one crushed by it? Start here. Virtu is not virtue. Mistranslate this once, you've already lost. Machiavelli chose this word deliberately, knowing it would be confused with Christian morality, knowing scholars would spend centuries arguing over whether he meant goodness when he meant the opposite. Virtu is capability married to will. It's the surgeon's hand that doesn't shake, the negotiator who doesn't flinch when the other side threatens to walk, the founder who fires their best friend when the company demands it. Most people think they want power. What they actually want is the appearance of power without the cost. They want authority without the burden of decisive action. They want people to respect them without having to make the brutal calls that earn respect. Machiavelli studied Cesare Borgia, a man so ruthless his name became synonymous with treachery, and concluded, this is what Virtu looks like in its purest form. Borgia didn't hesitate. When his enemies plotted against him, he invited them to negotiate. They came to the table expecting diplomacy. Borgia had them strangled before dessert. Machiavelli's point wasn't murder is good. His point was, Virtu is the ability to act when action is required, unclouded by sentiment, undiluted by hesitation. Here's where most people fail. They confuse virtù with talent. They think being smart or skilled is enough, but talent without will is a parked Ferrari. Impressive, useless. Machiavelli observed that history remembers the decisive, not the talented. The Roman generals who struck first, the politicians who seized moments others debated, the entrepreneurs who launched before the product was perfect. Virtù asks one question: when the moment arrives, can you pull the trigger? Not metaphorically, literally. If your business partner is stealing from the company, can you fire them before they drain the accounts? If your relationship is dead but comfortable, can you end it before another year evaporates? If the market is collapsing, can you sell while others freeze in denial? Most people fail this test. They see the moment. They know what needs to be done, but they hesitate. They seek consensus. They hope the problem resolves itself. Machiavelli called this the death of virtù, the moment capability meets fear and chooses paralysis. But here's what makes virtù truly dangerous. It's not just about action. It's about acting in ways others consider forbidden. Machiavelli observed that the prince who rules successfully must be willing to do what the moralist condemns. Lie when honesty loses. Betray before being betrayed. Strike preemptively before mercy becomes suicide. This isn't nihilism. It's strategy divorced from the fantasy that the universe rewards good people. The executive who quietly eliminates rivals before they gain power. The negotiator who leverages personal information to close deals. The politician who smiles while orchestrating the destruction of opposition. Virtù in motion. Society conditions people to recoil from this. That's manipulative. That's cold. That's wrong. Machiavelli's answer? The graveyard is full of moral men who lost to ruthless ones. Here's the pattern most never see. Virtù isn't about being ruthless. It's about being capable of ruthlessness when the situation demands it. The difference? Control. The sociopath is ruthless by default. No switch, no calibration. They burn every bridge because they lack the intelligence to recognize when mercy serves their interest. The Machiavellian with true virtù? They can be ruthless or merciful depending on what the moment requires. They're not slaves to emotion. They're not addicted to cruelty. They simply possess the range most people lack. Machiavelli's litmus test. Can you do what others won't when it's the only move that wins? Most people fail immediately. They'd rather lose with their morality intact than win by bending rules they've internalized as sacred. But watch what happens when someone with virtù enters their environment. The moral person telegraphs their limits. I would never lie. I could never fire someone. I don't believe in aggressive negotiation. The person with virtù hears this and thinks, now I know exactly how far I can push you. They've just received a map of your boundaries while revealing none of their own. This is why virtù terrifies the weak. It's not about being evil. It's about being unreadable, unpredictable, and willing to escalate past the point where normal people tap out. Machiavelli observed this in warfare. The general who fights honorably announces his movements, respects treaties, avoids civilian targets, loses to the general willing to feign retreat, poison wells, and strike at dawn during a declared ceasefire. The same pattern repeats in business, relationships, politics, every arena where resources are finite and only one party walks away with the prize. But virtù alone isn't enough. Capability without timing is wasted energy. Will without opportunity is fantasy. This is where the second force enters, and where most people who think they understand power reveal they've never studied the mechanism at all. Machiavelli wrote that Fortuna is a woman who favors the bold, but this metaphor hides the real insight. Fortuna isn't luck. It's chaos that rewards preparation. Most people experience randomness as purely destructive. Bad timing, unforeseen disasters, opportunities that evaporate before they can act. The Machiavellian sees Fortuna as a river that can be channeled, redirected, exploited by those who understand its nature. Here's the distinction that changes everything. Luck is passive. You hope, you wish, you buy lottery tickets. Fortuna is active. You position yourself in the path of likely outcomes, then move faster than competitors when the moment crystallizes. Machiavelli used the metaphor of the flood. Most people watch rivers overflow and call it bad luck. The strategic thinker builds levees before the storm, knowing floods are inevitable even if the timing is uncertain. This is Virtu applied to Fortuna. You can't control chaos, but you can control your readiness to exploit it. Watch how this plays out in real scenarios. The entrepreneur who raises capital before needing it. The politician who builds alliances before the crisis. The investor who positions in undervalued assets before the market corrects. They're not lucky. They're not psychic. They understand Fortuna flows in patterns. Chaos follows rules, even if those rules are probabilistic rather than deterministic. Most people wait for certainty. They want guaranteed outcomes before they commit resources. Machiavelli's observation: by the time certainty arrives, the opportunity has already been claimed by someone who moved in uncertainty. This is why the Machiavellian appears lucky to observers. They strike when others are still analyzing data. They pivot when others are paralyzed by indecision. They abandon sinking ships while others cling to hope. But here's the trap that destroys people who misunderstand Fortuna. They confuse positioning with gambling. The gambler ignores probability, defies preparation, and hopes random chance breaks their way. The Machiavellian stacks probability in their favor, prepares for multiple scenarios, and only commits when the odds justify the risk. Machiavelli's formula: Virtu gives you the ability to act. Fortuna gives you the moment to act. But you must recognize the difference between a wave you can ride and a current that will drown you. Here's where most people fail. They develop Virtu, skill, will, capability, but they deploy it at the wrong time. They launch the business during a recession. They confront their boss during layoffs. They make their move when Fortuna is flowing against them. Result? They blame bad luck when the real failure was timing. Machiavelli observed this pattern in military campaigns. The brilliant general who attacks during winter and loses his army to cold. The capable politician who makes his power grab when public sentiment has turned. Virtu without Fortuna is suicide. But Fortuna without Virtu is equally useless. The person who gets the perfect opportunity, the market gap, the chance encounter, the investor meeting, but lacks the capability to execute. They freeze, they fumble, they watch the moment pass. Machiavelli's conclusion: true power requires both forces in alignment. You must be capable and positioned, skilled and ready, willing to act and aware when action serves rather than destroys. Most people get one or the other, rarely both. The skilled person who waits for permission that never comes. The opportunist who lacks the ability to deliver. The capable leader who misreads the political climate and gets destroyed. Here's the mechanism most never see. Fortuna doesn't just create opportunities. It creates tests, moments where action is required without full information. Decisions that must be made before certainty arrives. Risks that punish hesitation more than failure. The Machiavellian recognizes these moments for what they are. Fortuna asking, do you possess true virtù, or are you just talented? Because talent performs when conditions are favorable. Virtù performs when Fortuna is ambiguous, hostile, or turning against you. Machiavelli watched leaders crumble when Fortuna shifted. The king who thrived during peace but collapsed when war came. The CEO who dominated in growth markets but panicked during contraction. Their virtù was conditional, circumstantial, dependent on Fortuna favoring them. True virtù persists despite Fortuna. This is where the third force enters, and this is where the mechanism becomes truly dangerous. Because Necessita doesn't just test your virtù or your timing, it removes all choices except one. Machiavelli observes something most political theorists still won't acknowledge. People don't change through inspiration. They change through pressure so severe that staying the same becomes impossible. Necessità is the force that eliminates options, the crisis that reveals character, the moment when everything comfortable evaporates and only brutal choices remain. Here's what makes Necessita dangerous. It doesn't announce itself. It accumulates silently. Bad decisions compounding, threats growing, vulnerabilities deepening, until suddenly the floor collapses and you're forced to act with no preparation, no support, no time. Machiavelli's observation: the prince who waits for Necessità to arrive before developing Virtù has already lost. because Necessita doesn't care about fairness. It doesn't give you time to find yourself or figure things out. It demands immediate action, and if you lack Virtu, the capability, the will, the decisiveness, it destroys you. Most people experience Necessita as trauma: the layoff, the betrayal, the market crash, the diagnosis. They're shocked, unprepared, overwhelmed. The Machiavellian sees Necessita coming, not because they're prophetic, but because they study patterns. They recognize when systems are fragile, when relationships are deteriorating, when markets are overextended. They prepare before Necessita arrives. But here's where this gets fascinating. Machiavelli didn't just study Necessita as something that happens to people. He studied how the strategic weaponize it. How do you control someone without force? Create Necessita. Put them in a position where they have no choice but to comply. Engineer the crisis that makes your solution the only option. Construct the scenario where refusing you costs them everything. This is how kingdoms are taken, how negotiations are won, how competitors are eliminated. Not through overt aggression that triggers resistance, but through creating conditions where submission becomes logical, necessary, inevitable. Watch this pattern in corporate environments. The executive who quietly allows a project to fail, knowing the fallout will create Necessita that justifies their desired restructuring. The board member who lets the CEO make disastrous decisions, accumulating evidence for the termination they've wanted from the beginning. They're not creating the crisis. They're allowing the natural consequences of incompetence to manifest, then positioning themselves as the only solution when Necessita arrives. Machiavelli called this the art of the strategic void. Let chaos emerge, appear uninvolved, then step in as the savior when desperation makes people grateful for any hand that pulls them from the water. Most people recoil from this. That's manipulation. That's cruel. Machiavelli's answer? Necessita will arrive whether you orchestrate it or not. The question is whether you'll be the one drowning or the one offering the rope. Here's the deeper mechanism. Necessita doesn't just force action. It reveals true character. The business partner who seems loyal until Necessita arrives, bankruptcy looming, investigators circling, suddenly offers to testify against you in exchange for immunity. The spouse who seems committed until Necessita arrives, cancer diagnosis, financial ruin, suddenly files for divorce rather than face hardship. The friend who seems dependable until Necessita arrives, social scandal, career crisis, suddenly ghosts you to protect their reputation. Machiavelli observed this pattern across every relationship category. Comfort breeds performance, Necessita reveals reality. This is why the Machiavellian deliberately creates small tests of Necessita, not to be cruel, but to identify who possesses genuine virtù versus who merely performs competence when conditions are easy. The manager who gives subordinates impossible projects to see who rises versus who makes excuses. The investor who creates artificial urgency to see who panics versus who executes under pressure. They're not sadists. They're strategists who understand that people lie about their capabilities until Necessita forces truth. But here's what most people miss about Necessita. It's not just external pressure. It's the moment when internal conflict becomes unsustainable. The cognitive dissonance between who you pretend to be and who you actually are. The gap between your stated values and your revealed preferences. The contradiction between your self-image and your behavior. Machiavelli recognized that Necessita forces resolution. You can't maintain the performance anymore. The mask cracks. The lie becomes too expensive to sustain. This is where transformation occurs. Not through motivation or inspiration, but through pressure so intense that changing becomes easier than staying the same. The executive who finally fires the incompetent friend because keeping them costs more than the guilt of letting them go. The entrepreneur who finally pivots because denial means bankruptcy. The person who finally ends the dead relationship because loneliness seems preferable to another year of pretending. Necessita is the force that makes cowards brave and makes the delusional realistic, but only if they possess enough virtù to act when the moment arrives. Now watch what happens when all three forces align. Virtù gives you capability. Fortuna gives you opportunity. Necessita removes all obstacles to action. This is the formula Machiavelli encoded in The Prince, hidden in stories of Cesare Borgia and Roman generals, waiting for readers capable of extracting the mechanism from the narrative. Most people experience these forces in isolation. They develop Virtu, but never find opportunity. They encounter Fortuna, but lack capability. They face Necessita, but freeze instead of acting. The Machiavellian orchestrates alignment. Here's how this looks in practice. Stage 1. Develop Virtu before you need it. Capability isn't built in crisis, it's built in preparation. The surgeon doesn't learn to operate while the patient bleeds out. The negotiator doesn't learn persuasion during the make-or-break meeting. Virtu requires deliberate practice in low-stakes environments, so it's available when Necessita arrives. Most people avoid this. They wait until they have to be capable, then wonder why they collapse under pressure. Machiavelli's observation: the prince who waits for war to learn combat dies in his first battle. Stage 2. Position yourself where Fortuna flows. Opportunity isn't random. It clusters in specific environments, relationships, markets. The Machiavellian doesn't wait for luck. They place themselves in contexts where valuable opportunities are statistically likely to emerge. The entrepreneur who moves to Silicon Valley, the executive who joins companies during growth phases, the investor who studies emerging markets. They're not lucky, they're positioned. Machiavelli's litmus test: are you in rooms where decisions are made, or are you waiting for decisions to be announced? Stage 3. Recognize when Necessita creates advantage. Here's where most people fail catastrophically. They see crisis as purely destructive. Market crash, industry disruption, scandal, collapse. The Machiavellian sees crisis as the moment when old orders dissolve and new hierarchies form. When Necessita arrives, the question isn't, how do I survive? It's, how do I emerge from this stronger while others are weakened? Machiavelli studied the pattern repeatedly. The politician who rises during national crisis, the entrepreneur who builds during recession, the general who gains power during war. They're not opportunists exploiting tragedy. They're strategists who recognize that Necessita redistributes power to those capable of acting while others are paralyzed. Here's the complete mechanism. 1. Develop Virtu, capability, will, decisiveness, before Necessita arrives. 2. Position yourself where Fortuna is likely to create opportunity, the right industries, relationships, markets. 3. When Necessita arrives, and it always arrives, act while others freeze. 4. Use the chaos to restructure relationships, eliminate competition, and claim resources others are too overwhelmed to defend. 5. Emerge from crisis with more power, more position, more leverage than before. This is how kingdoms are built, how industries are dominated, how empires rise from ashes. Not through luck, not through virtue, through understanding the three forces and orchestrating their alignment. But here's the final piece most people never grasp. The triad doesn't just operate externally, it operates within you. Your internal virtu, your willpower, discipline, capability, your internal fortuna, the random thoughts, emotions, impulses that seem to arrive unbidden. Your internal necessita, the pressure that builds when contradictions become unsustainable. Machiavelli recognized that the prince who cannot govern himself cannot govern others. The same three forces that determine external power determine internal mastery. Can you act despite fear? That's Virtu. Can you seize moments of clarity before they vanish? That's Fortuna. Can you change when staying the same becomes impossible? That's Necessita. Most people fail all three tests. They're slaves to emotion, blind to opportunity, resistant to necessary transformation. The Machiavellian masters the triad internally first, then deploys it externally. But here's what they don't tell you about mastering the triad. There's a price. Not karma, not cosmic justice. Something more subtle and more permanent. You stop being able to unsee the mechanism. Every conversation becomes a power dynamic. Every relationship becomes strategic positioning. Every crisis becomes opportunity. The casual observer sees you as cold, calculating, ruthless. They're not wrong. Machiavelli himself was exiled, despised, remembered as the architect of tyranny, rather than the observer of patterns that existed long before he named them. This is the cost of seeing clearly in a world that prefers comfortable delusions. You recognize when people are performing versus revealing. You spot manipulation before it lands. You see Necessita approaching while others are oblivious. This knowledge isolates you, because once you understand the Triad, you can't relate to people who believe in fairness, who trust in virtue, who expect reciprocity. You've crossed a threshold. You've eaten the fruit. You can't return to ignorance. Machiavelli's final observation? The prince who rules successfully must be willing to be hated, because the strategic moves that maintain power are often the moves that earn contempt. Most people want power and to be loved, want to dominate and to be seen as virtuous. Machiavelli's answer? Choose. You cannot have both. The executive who makes brutal but necessary cuts, the politician who betrays allies to survive, the founder who takes full credit for collaborative work. They win, but they're not loved. This is the bargain. Effectiveness or approval, power or popularity, reality or the performance of morality that keeps you weak. Here's what makes this truly dangerous. Some people hear this and think, I'll be Machiavellian in private, but maintain the appearance of virtue publicly. Machiavelli already thought of this. He called it the highest form of virtù, appearing moral while acting strategically. But this requires even greater capability. You must be skilled enough to hide the mechanism while deploying it, to win while seeming to play fair, to dominate while appearing collaborative. This is mastery, not crude manipulation, not obvious ruthlessness, but strategic action so subtle that observers miss it entirely. The negotiator who gets everything they want while the other party feels like they won, the leader who eliminates rivals while appearing generous, the politician who destroys opposition while being praised for civility. This is the Triad operating at maximum sophistication, but it requires something most people lack: the discipline to control your ego's need for credit. Because the moment you need people to know how smart you are, how ruthless you can be, how much you're controlling, you've lost. True power doesn't announce itself. It operates invisibly. It wins while appearing not to compete. Machiavelli's ultimate lesson? The prince who must prove he is a prince is no prince at all. So here's what you now understand that most people never will. Power isn't distributed randomly. Success isn't luck. Outcomes aren't determined by virtue or hard work or fairness. They're determined by three forces: Virtu, your capability and will to act decisively when action is required, unclouded by sentiment or hesitation; Fortuna, your positioning in the path of opportunity and your ability to move faster than competitors when chaos creates openings; Necessita, your recognition of pressure as a tool rather than a threat, and your willingness to create conditions where others have no choice but to comply. Master 1, you're talented but vulnerable. Master 2, you're dangerous but inconsistent. Master all three, you become the person others study, trying to understand how you keep winning. But here's the final test Machiavelli never made explicit. The Triad can be used for creation or destruction, to build empires or burn them, to liberate or to dominate. The mechanism is neutral. The application is yours. Most people hear this and immediately categorize, that's evil. Machiavelli would laugh. Evil, good, these are distractions. The question is, are you capable of acting in your interest when the moment demands it? Or will you be the virtuous corpse everyone mourns but no one emulates? This isn't a call to cruelty, it's a call to clarity. See the world as it is, not as you wish it were. Recognize that Virtu, Fortuna, and Necessita operate whether you acknowledge them or not. The only question is whether you'll master the mechanism or be crushed by those who already have. Machiavelli wrote The Prince as a manual for survival in a world without mercy. 5 centuries later, the same forces operate in boardrooms, relationships, markets, politics, different costumes, same mechanism. You now possess the framework. What you do with it determines whether you're reading this as education or entertainment. Because if this is just entertainment, interesting ideas you'll forget by tomorrow, then nothing changes. But if this is transformation, the moment you recognize that mastering the Triad is the difference between living on your terms versus being a pawn in systems you don't understand, then everything changes. Machiavelli's final gift wasn't the knowledge, it was the choice. Keep pretending the world is fair, or accept the mechanism and act accordingly. The triad is already operating in your life, in your career, in your relationships. The question was never whether you'd encounter these forces. The question was always whether you'd recognize them before it was too late. Most people will watch this and change nothing. They'll return to comfortable beliefs. They'll convince themselves they're different. They'll wait for fairness that never arrives. That's fine. The world needs pawns. But some of you, the ones who felt recognition rather than resistance, you understand now that you've been playing a game without knowing the rules. Virtu, Fortuna, Necessita. Not philosophy, not theory. The three forces that determine who rises and who kneels. Machiavelli handed you the mechanism 5 centuries ago. What you build with it is yours.